Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. Happy to have them and all of you with us here today for what is a very busy show. We'll preview G-Day. Mike Griffith will help us do that. Georgia got a commitment yesterday. We'll talk briefly about that. There's a very important position battle besides quarterback that's taking place at UGA right now. We'll give you an update on that. Some interesting things related to a few of the other SEC teams that are out there. We'll cover some of those bases. Names of note for Georgia here. But off the top, it's quarterback conversation. National media giving some attention to the UGA quarterback competition. We'll tell you about that. And we'll revisit, I think, some pretty interesting words from a guy, one of the few guys that knows what it feels like to be a Carson Beck or a Brock Vandagriff. But exactly what both these guys are going through right now, I think this is a very interesting way to set the stage for Saturday. Obviously, quarterbacks in the spotlight, and we're focusing in on that ourselves here today there as well. We are very happy to have you with us for it. Oh, yeah, by the way, there's a brand new UGA to be displayed and debuted as well. So we'll talk about that, too, over the course of our time here together. Busy show. Looking forward to it. So what do you say we go ahead and get it started? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Before our live show begins, we take a little bit of time to do something we call our First and 15. It's at DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. We do it at 9:45 in the morning. If you're ever around and want to join us for that, it's kind of a special thing. It kind of only exists there on that platform. It's just kind of a way of us saying thank you to the folks who've kind of helped us kind of grow and debut our newest platform on which our show is available. So I tell you all that to say, one of the things I showed to them prior to this show beginning today was wearing a very special shirt in honor of some news we learned yesterday. We'll talk more about the brand new UGA coming up on Saturday, but I'm wearing today my UGA 10 shirt. This is not an ad, but this shirt was made exclusively for the UGA bookstore from our friends at Peter Millar, and so it's the UGA 10 line. So I've got my UGA 10 shirt on today because UGA's getting ready to pass that collar over to the new UGA 11, Q giving way to Boom. We'll talk about Boom a little bit later on today, and I think you have to say UGA 10, the most decorated UGA of all time. You hate to say the greatest UGA of all time because they've all given their all to UGA, but I think you have to say greatest UGA ever. A little bit of a surprising announcement for me yesterday to see a new UGA to be introduced, but that's one of the things that'll make G-Day fun on Saturday. More on that later on. So I am decked out in honor of that today. Now, in addition to collaring a new mascot, Georgia's also hoping to find a new starting quarterback as well, or at least see some data and some information that kind of gives you an idea of where this quarterback competition is headed, because we do not believe it's settled after spring practice. We believe it's going to go into the summer, and I would suggest there's even a chance this goes into the fall. What seems like a pretty hot competition right now between Brock Vandagriff and Carson Beck, with Gunnar Stockton also a part of it. No one said a bad word about Stockton as of yet, certainly not at all, but he is a little bit younger, and it seems like his time as the Georgia starting quarterback might come later on. For now, this sort of feels like it's Carson versus Brock to be the starter. We've obviously been very interested in this. We've talked about this in some form or fashion many, many days here over the course of spring practice. And what is fun is this is starting to get some national attention there as well. Now, if you listen to yesterday's show, you know that I was very upset with folks over at CBS Sports, and I admitted this is probably a silly thing to be upset about, but they had done that story the other day about, here are the freshmen to watch for spring games. And somehow, some way, if you heard yesterday, you heard me say this, somehow, some way, Georgia, which is what? Back-to-back national champs, number 2 recruiting class, 20 whatever early enrollees, and yet somehow that program, with those accolades to its credit, was not able to produce a freshman of the caliber to get noticed by CBS Sports and its freshmen to watch for upcoming spring games. Like I said, that's sort of a silly thing to be bothered by, but it's just sort of the stuff you notice this time of year. So I kind of buried CBS Sports yesterday, but I will praise them today because in their latest story, highlighting the spring games to watch, thankfully, little old Georgia, who all it's done is won 2 straight national championships, was at least good enough to get on the radar of CBS for its spring games to watch for the upcoming weekend, and of course next weekend there too. There are a lot of very interesting things about to happen in college football over the course of the next couple of Saturdays. But it was one thing in particular that the CBS writer, in this case it's our good friend Barrett Sallee, It was one thing in particular that the CBS writers said about this Georgia quarterback competition that I think actually sets the stage for us to have a pretty interesting conversation about this today. Let me show you this on the screen. Barrett, guy who's been on our show many times in the past, says the reason why the Georgia spring game, G-Day as we call it, is going to be so interesting is because that all eyes are going to be on Carson Beck and Brock Vandagriff. He says Beck's got more experience, but both have drawn rave reviews this spring. Rave reviews is kind of an interesting phrase there, and is that the way I would characterize this? I certainly haven't heard a bad word mentioned about Beck or Vandagriff at all. I think the things we've heard thus far would lead you to believe this is a real competition. There is some mystery and intrigue about who wins it. Going into the spring, Carson Beck was the favorite, I believe. He was last year's backup. He's the guy who's been here longest. When he's played in games, by the way, some game experience is a pretty big weapon in this competition. He has certainly looked the part of a future Georgia quarterback. So he was the guy I think folks kind of came into this spring feeling like they knew more about. That's probably what made him a little bit of a point spread favorite here in this particular situation. But everything we've been kind of told, and a lot of this is telephone game, somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who's somebody, sort of whispers and rumors and innuendo about what's been going on behind closed doors in these scrimmages. But it does sort of sound like Brock Vandagriff has been kind of holding his own in all of this. So if it is true these quarterbacks have, quote, drawn rave reviews thus far this spring, as Barrett suggests, then some of that is being pushed here by Vandagriff. Some of that is about Vandagriff inserting himself as a very real factor into this competition, not just a placeholder so that it doesn't appear that Carson Beck was just sort of given the job, that he didn't just win it by default. But in this case, it seems like in the person of Brock Vandagriff, this is more than that. Vandagriff holding his own, and Vandagriff sort of establishing himself as a potential realistic candidate to actually win the job. And a lot of what we see on Saturday is going to kind of validate that one way or another. There's either some space and some distance with Beck in comparison to Vandagriff, or Vandagriff kind of asserts himself and makes this something that feels like a very big story. In fact, going into the summer, even bigger than it feels right now, because Vandagriff having a good day would certainly add a lot of magnitude to this quarterback competition, the conversation happening around that competition. That is why, and you've probably heard me say this a couple of times, that is why I have said going into Saturday, no disrespect to Carson Beck and no disrespect to Gunnar Stockton, but I have said the single most interesting player for Georgia on Saturday is probably Brock Vandagriff, because Vandagriff is the one that determines, is this a real competition or not? Let's say that Vandagriff, whatever, just wave a magic wand, he disappears. Would Georgia feel okay about starting Carson Beck if there was no Brock Vandagriff? I think the indication we have is, they probably would feel okay about that. But Georgia wants a competition because they want to make sure if Beck does win that he really was the best guy, or they want him made better by being pushed hard by a guy like Vandagriff, or they're okay with the alternative here too, which is, hey, we saw Beck. He was the number 2 quarterback a year ago. He looked pretty good there in that spot. I think Georgia would have been okay playing him, but my gosh, the former 5-star Brock Vandagriff just performed so well during practice that you couldn't deny him. You couldn't say no to him. You had to ascend him to that role of starting quarterback. That's why Georgia wants this competition, and that's why I believe seeing what Vandagriff does to really make this a real, full-fledged competition on Saturday is so interesting. And I'll revisit something else that happened on yesterday's show for a minute here too. Near the end, and if you missed this, you should go back and hear it for yourself. Near the end of yesterday's show, we had the former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm on our program, one of the few guys out there that kind of knows what Carson Beck and Brock Vandagriff feel like, because Jake Fromm himself has been a part of quarterback competitions here at Georgia with Kirby Smart as his head coach. He knows the feeling that both these guys are going through right now. And I posed the question to him that I just stated to you, that Brock Vandagriff feels like, to me, the most interesting player for Georgia on Saturday. And I thought that Jake Fromm had a really interesting thing to say in response to that. This is Jake on Brock Vandagriff. This is from yesterday.
It's kind of that allure of the unknown. We've seen Carson come in, play in games, done well, got the big arm, made some good throws. But it's just kind of this unknown element where it's like, hey, what exactly is Brock Vandagriff? Like you alluded to earlier, the quarterbacks being in different color jerseys, not going to be able to see the full skill set of Brock and what he can do with his legs. But, I kind of see Brock maybe even being a Stetson on steroids, a bigger body, even more athletic. Gosh, it's kind of tough to say. More athletic than Stetson, and be able to make some off-schedule plays. And I think it'll be really fun to watch.
So when you hear what Jake Fromm says about Brock Vandagriff right there, and by the way, Jake's a guy who's still pretty close to this program. He knows these quarterbacks pretty well. When you hear him saying what he's saying right there about Brock Vandagriff, you can't help but think, wow, that's really interesting. That Stetson Bennett was tabbed as the Georgia quarterback in part because of his athleticism, and what Jake Fromm says there is that Brock Vandagriff is kind of a bigger version of that same athleticism, and if not, even maybe slightly more athletic. That's a very interesting description there on that. By the way, it's also worth pointing out when Jake says that Brock Vandagriff is Stetson Bennett on steroids, it's worth pointing out that he doesn't actually mean that he's on steroids. He just means that sort of an inflated version of the athleticism that we saw from Stetson Bennett a year ago. That's the same level of athleticism, just coming in a bigger body, which I think is a very interesting potential description on all of this. And as we've talked about, when you look at G-Day, this is not exactly a game format that necessarily suits Vandagriff's skill set quite as well as we think it suits Carson Beck's skill set. That Carson Beck is the guy that sort of stands there and throws darts. Vandagriff's one of those guys that wants to move around a little bit more, and he wants to elude tacklers, and he wants to keep play alive with his legs. He may run for positive yardage, or he may scramble around and give himself a chance, buy himself some time to make a big throw. Well, you're not doing that in G-Day. That's the stuff you do during the fall. So what we've said is, hey, if Vandagriff looks the part on Saturday along with Carson Beck, then that only increases the likelihood that as you get closer and closer to real football this September, that Brock Vandagriff could be a real threat to actually win this starting quarterback job, which sort of takes us back to something we said about Carson Beck, a few times here. And, it's not my intention to stir the pot and make this more than it is, but I think what I'm saying here is probably true. Carson Beck has played in some football games for Georgia. He has played in real games in which the final score got written down and saved for all of history. And yet I think the most pressure-packed moment that Beck has probably faced in his Georgia career probably comes on Saturday, because this is in a lot of ways an on-the-job audition or an interview of sorts to kind of show that he's supposed to be the Georgia starting quarterback. And given the fact that he has played in games, given the fact that he's been here, this is now his fourth year on campus, given the fact that he was last year's backup, given the fact that he was sort of viewed as the favorite to win this job coming into it, I think you have to say that there is more pressure to perform on Beck on Saturday than there probably is on Vandagriff. Now, I'm not trying to put undue pressure on Carson. I think if Carson were sitting here right now, he'd probably acknowledge that himself, that he wants to show some distance. He wants to say, hey, look at where I am. There's some space between me and Vandagriff right now. I'm just able to go out here and make the offense hum more efficiently. I'm just more capable of doing that. And by the way, if he shows that, then it would seem like he is probably then well on his way to doing what a lot of Georgia fans thought he was going to do anyway, which is win that starting quarterback job. And once again, to hear from Jake Fromm on this point, seems like he sort of agrees that for the guy in back who has kind of had a lot of component pieces in place that make you think he's supposed to be in the starter, putting all of that on display on Saturday. It sounds like Jake is kind of on the same page with us on this. Once again, Jake from yesterday.
I mean, I hate to say it, but there is definitely a lot more pressure on Carson than the other two guys, because he's the guy who's going to be running out with the one, the guy they're expecting to be the guy, a guy that should be the guy. So, look, as the quarterbacks, the way it kind of goes in that room right now, everybody's looking at Carson to be the guy. And, I mean, sadly enough, I mean, that's where the pressure is going to be. It's going to be on him. And if I'm Brock, if I'm Gunner right now, I'm going to go out and play free and play my game.
Yeah, so obviously what Jake's kind of saying there is, hey, in the case of Brock, certainly in the case of Gunner, these are younger quarterbacks. They've got way more time in the system. Whereas, Carson probably feels like his moment is right now, and so therefore that probably does put a little bit of pressure. And I think that's kind of okay. I don't think we're being unfair to Carson by saying that. I think if you're Carson Beck, handling pressure well is one of the things you want, because that's one of the ways that you show that you're worthy of being the starting quarterback. But there's also a chance, as our friend Raleigh Dog points out here in our Dog Nation comments section, I happened to look down and see it, that, hey, maybe Carson Beck is ready, and maybe Brock Vandagriff is ready too, and maybe Gunnar Stockton can be ready there as well. I mean, it could just be that Georgia's loaded at quarterback. There is no bad choice. It's simply about trying to figure out what the best choice is. To me, this is one of the things that makes G-Day really fun. Rave reviews, supposedly these Georgia quarterbacks have kind of drawn thus far this spring, and that could be the case. I certainly haven't heard anything bad said about them yet. They get a chance to show us all, whether you're watching on TV or happen to be in the stadium. I think this sets up to be about as fun a G-Day as we've experienced. Carson Beck gets his time in the sun. Brock Vandagriff gets to show what he's all about there as well. And frankly, Georgia fans, I think, are rightly thinking here, let the best man win. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management, and happy to have you with us. Whether you join us 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, referenced that a moment ago, or 10 a.m. across all the other video platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. Just happy to have you with us here across all of the video platforms. Radio at noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 Ref, podcast, Apple, Spotify, the Google Podcast Player, worldfamousDawgNation.com, listening directly on SoundCloud. On and on you could go. So many ways to hear the podcast, whichever way you choose, whatever way you prefer to have our show as a part of your life. We're just appreciative of you for doing it. And a big thanks to our friends at Breda Pest Management for making it all possible there as well. You know, they're the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. So when you're there in the stadium on Saturday and you're looking around at Sanford Stadium, or if you're part of the other great sports venues this time of year, just know that those stadiums, those venues protected by Breda Pest Management, for bugs, for critters, from termites, things like that. And that same level of protection that UGA trusts, you can actually have that same level of protection with your own home there as well, or your business, your commercial property, whatever you have going on there. Breda Pest Management wants to take good care of you. And listen, for a company like this, they've been in business since 1975. They got 125 or whatever employees. This is a well-resourced company, and the strength they've developed over the course of that time, so strong they've been recognized by UGA as the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. That strength, that level of resource, you can leverage that yourself by saving money. That means if you're working with some fly-by-night termite company, something like that, and every year you get that letter in the mail, sorry, cost of service going to go up and blah, blah, blah. You've kind of gotten that before. Well, that's not going to happen at Breda Pest Management. You're going to make more money, put more money back in your pocket instantly just for making that switch to Breda Pest Management. It's time to do that. Go to BredaPest.com. It's BREDA, BredaPest.com. I love Matt Breda and his whole family. Met them many times. Big sports fans. Matt's going to be at Georgia games all the time. Big Braves fan, too. You just see him, around town a lot. So it's kind of fun to do business with folks who are kind of into the same stuff we are. And you better believe the folks over there at Breda Pest Management, they are a big part of that. So find them online. BredaPest.com. That's BREDA, BredaPest.com. All right. We're going to do a conversation with Mike Griffith here coming up in just a moment. A good preview of G-Day. We'll look forward to getting that from Mike here, his thoughts on that. Prior to that, though, I want to mention a couple of things around the Dawghouse. Let me start with this. So we just did a whole bunch on quarterback and what's going to happen there between these guys. We kind of sort of primarily view this as Carson Beck versus Brock Vandagriff, with Gunnar Stockton also a part of this. But that's not the only intense competition that's currently taking place for UGA right now. I think there's also something really interesting happening at left tackle there as well. And this is one of those things for me that's all good because, as I've told you before, my biggest concern about Georgia kind of coming into the spring, and I think this probably actually did count as my single biggest concern, was I expected Georgia to have two good starters at the tackle spots. I was a little bit concerned about the depth behind that. But the fact that this competition between Austin Blaske and Ernest Green obviously the much higher rated recruit, Blaske, a guy who just seems like he doesn't want to be denied, very, very tough guy. The way in which this competition has played out has made me feel better of, well, somebody's going to win it, but the guy that doesn't win it seems like he's certainly a capable player who, if you had to insert him in the lineup, and at some point in time you probably will because tackles get hurt, then Georgia's probably okay there too. That suddenly the intensity of this competition has actually made me feel better about the overall tackle depth that exists around the Georgia program. With that in mind, Kirby Smart on Saturday gave you a little bit of an update about how it's working right now between Blaske and Green, and what sounds like is just some good football between these two guys right now, and really both of them kind of benefiting the Georgia offensive line overall when they're in for these reps during scrimmages and things like that. This is Kirby and what's happening there at left tackle right now.
They're both doing a good job. They're competing hard. They're rotating in there. They both are exceptional kids. They're great kids to be around. They both practice really hard. They're both extremely physical. They both have had dinged up injuries, and neither one has flinched. I mean, like, they won't come out. Ernest waves somebody off because, he wants to stay out there and get his reps, and his ankle's dinged up one time. Blasky, the same thing, whether it's shoulder or knee. I see the guy limping. He wants his reps, and I respect more than anything a guy's mental and physical toughness. They both have that, and they both done a great job. I mean, we have not made it to a season in, I think, 4 years that we didn't have a starting tackle miss a game. So it tells me you better have 3 tackles, and we're trying really hard to develop 3 to 4 tackles.
So I really like that from Kirby Smart. I do. And the point he makes there at the end is also what I was talking about a moment ago there as well, which is, you want that additional tackle depth. That it's not, Georgia the last couple of years has had not only great tackles, you felt great about, obviously, Broderick Jones going to be a top 10, top 15 pick in April. You felt great about Warren McClendon, but you also knew you had a guy like Amarius Mims waiting the wings. And when Georgia had to move into the starting lineup for the college football playoff, it seemed like the offense didn't skip a beat. So if you're trying to replicate what you had a year ago, you not only have to get 2 brand new full season starters ready, but you've got to have other guys waiting the wings. And so what I'm left to conclude here is, I had, Ernest Green kind of written in stone to be the starter, and that's probably just on the basis of the fact that he was the higher overall rated recruit at the beginning of the season. But it sounds like Austin Blasky is one of those guys who's performing right now far better than his recruiting ranking would have suggested. So I'm fairly agnostic about this as a Georgia fan. It can be Green, it can be Blasky. I'm just glad Georgia's got both of them here right now. And as Kirby Smart said, hey, listen, you also want that 4th tackle to emerge too. That goes back to something that Jeff Sentell told us about on Friday. On his list of freshmen to watch, Monroe Freeling is a part of that. That's an incoming guy, young player. But listen, as Kirby Smart said plenty of times, if you're good enough, you're old enough. So, Freeling might be that next tackle to give Georgia that full amount of depth there at the tackle position. One of the things that's going to be fun to watch on G-Day. And maybe one of those things, if you're not paying close attention to it, you might miss. Maybe you take your binoculars to the stadium with you, or maybe you're rewinding that, live TV a couple of times to kind of see who's moving people as an offensive lineman, who's really kind of building a wall for these quarterbacks. Taking some time to kind of watch some of that, I would imagine that's going to be a big part of what G-Day is about on Saturday. And kind of while we're in the around the Dawghouse mood here for a moment, let me also shout out Georgia for yesterday getting a wide receiver commit from a guy. I told you yesterday I wasn't too familiar with Natarian Tuggle, who committed to the program yesterday, but once you find out that he goes by Nitro, that his name is Nitro Tuggle, you're like, well, okay, that tells you everything you know. He's at least going to be a 2-time All-SEC performer just on the basis of that name alone. Nitro Tuggle is a very, very cool name. I also saw where he's on Twitter yesterday kind of giving a shout-out to Dylan Raiola, doing some recruiting on behalf of UGA. So I wanted to make sure we mentioned Mr. Tuggle there. Nice commitment announcement for Georgia yesterday at the wide receiver spot. Really cool name, obviously. And another one of those guys kind of pointing in the direction of Dylan Raiola here for that class of 2024. So we'll see how all of that plays out. All right, we got a really fun show. Before we're done, something from Alabama's perspective. We gave you some bad news with the Crimson Tide yesterday. I think I may have a little bit more bad news to give you about Alabama here today. If I'm a Bama fan, something I'm kind of concerned about. We'll tell you about that and a whole lot more other stuff going on around the SEC before we're all said and done. But for now, on everything as it relates to G-Day, getting ready for a fun Saturday between the hedges, let's talk to Mike Griffith here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Always glad to have Mike Griffith here on DawgNation Daily. Looking forward to seeing him back in Athens on Saturday. Just kind of fun to kind of get everybody back together between the hedges there at Sanford Stadium. A little bit of a different look for the stadium. I know the south side of the stadium still pretty I guess in progress with some construction going on. But nonetheless, we're going to have a fun day anyway. And, Mike, let me bring you on the discussion I was just having there a moment ago. We'll get to quarterback and stuff like that. But I think one of the real interesting developments for Georgia thus far this spring has been the competition between Austin Blasky and Ernest Green. And I don't mind admitting this. I mean, we have a tendency here to fixate on the higher-rated recruit. That's clearly That's clearly what Green is. But Austin Blaske, much less heralded as a recruit, it sounds like he's a real fighter. It sounds like, he's brought a lot of toughness to this competition, and Ernest Green's trying to match that there as well. My feeling on this, just knowing that Georgia has two capable performers at left tackle, at the very least speaks to potentially good depth for the program. But what have you made of that competition between Blaske and Ernest Green? Sounds like it's been a pretty hard-fought battle thus far.
Well, it has, but I want to take off on Nitro. I think Nitro's onto something. I think we could have Boom Boom, Brandon Adams, and Killer, Connor Riley, Jeff the Animal Centel. I think he's onto something with this marketing deal. But seriously, as far as that left tackle, like you said, there's nothing bad about this. This is fantastic that Blaske is, kind of this Swiss Army knife guy, and I know that. Cade Mays didn't leave in the best of ways, but let's face it, he was very valuable when he was with Georgia because of his ability to play different positions. Yeah. And Blaske kind of strikes me in that same vein. I mean, here's a guy that can play tackle. Here's a guy that can play center, probably guard. And as Kirby pointed out, the last 4 years, they haven't gotten through the last 4 years without a tackle missing a game. So it tells him that you need to have depth at that position, and we know that winning national championships, they're really all about the journey. The last 2 years, there's been potential stumbling blocks when Georgia had to reach deep and heroes had to step up, and maybe players that we didn't necessarily count on before became difference makers, and you just never know when and where that'll be. I guess I think back, Brandon, to the 2021 championship game, and Georgia's offense really struggled for 3 quarters. I mean, it was really actually bad. I remember on that cruise we went on last year, we all watched it, and first 3 quarters, we all just kind of looked at each other going, oh, I forgot about that part, until they brought Broderick in and shifted Jamari Salyer inside, and it just took off. So that was a great example of how offensive line depth and quality can make a difference, and I think this is more of the same.
One of the things we've talked about a little bit here the last couple of days are some of these incoming freshmen. Georgia obviously has a lot of them. I think that's just kind of the new trend. 20, 21, something like that. Big number of early enrollees going through spring practice. Based on what you've heard or your own curiosity, who are some freshmen to watch for Georgia on Saturday, you think?
Yeah, it's a great trend at Georgia. I don't know if other schools are getting that amount or that quality. Probably not. I mean, this is part of Georgia's great recruiting. It's almost like you get another half a season. So when you start the year, these are. Look at Malachi Starks, great example. Last year midterm enrollee.
Yeah.
The question is, it's twofold. Where do you need them to step up, and who's look good? I mean, the name we all keep hearing, and speaking of nicknames, is Lawson Lucky. That sounds like a pretty good name to me.
It does.
I mean,
yeah.
and everything I keep hearing is, this is a guy that people that have gone to the practices say this guy stands out, and Kirby's mentioned him enough times, and you're going, wow, maybe there's something to. I mean, there's already a Brock Bowers there, and he's not, in the same kind of vein as a Darnell where he's just going to mash people. But if you could maintain, don't forget Oscar Delp. But my goodness, this guy is an impact player, right? We heard a lot about Rod Robinson early on, the freshman running back, and what might he add and how might he be called upon. And we think that Andrew Paul will be back before long. We think Kendall Milton, we've been told, will be back running this summer, and Dejon Edwards been plagued a little bit with the hamstrings, but if you know that you've got a guy like that in the making, that's exciting. The midterm enrollees, maybe not freshmen, but I want to see what Dom Lovett looks like. I want to see if Missouri's best receiver from a year ago and Mississippi State's best receiver can get into the fold at Georgia and be difference makers. So those are some of the guys. And then I've already seen the eyeball test for Mpemba and Wilson and Gabe. When you see these, you wait a minute. What senior? No, that's not. That's a freshman. These guys have the look. Now, Kirby has kind of hinted, Brandon, that they got to get the work ethic, and I thought he really laid down the law at that last press conference. Like we didn't ask him about it. I mean, Kirby doesn't often come in there, necessarily with some narrative to spin. I mean, he's got a pretty solid take on everything, premeditated, but it's not like he wants to advertise it. But this time he did. And he came in there and said there's 2 distinctly different groups on this team. And my takeaway was those young guys better get it. They better learn how to compete at the Georgia level. And this is an issue with teams that try to, build dynasties is how does it translate? How do you make it so these young guys realize there's a lot of hard work to be done. You don't just show up and put on the G. I mean, you got to grind and you got to fight, and it seemed to be like that's what Kirby wanted for these young guys to be able to take the message from the classroom to the field. And so just in general, when you talk about G Day, I want to see if some of those young guys, I want to see which ones are able to take the message to the field on G Day.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting the way that Kirby Smart described that. You know, what was he said, like between guys who've been here only a year and guys who are just gotten here, it's basically almost like half the team has a year experience or left, or something. You know, whatever it was that he said was something along the lines of the way that he described it. You kind of make you think of, oh yeah, well, if you put it that way, you know, there are a lot of guys who are only kind of just now getting acclimated to what Georgia football is all about. Which to me, I sort of look at as two sides of the same coin. On the one hand, these are guys that you're having to try to train up to understand what the Georgia way sort of is. But on the other side of this, Mike, this is what's cool about, I would say, college football compared to NFL or professional sports. We have the same roster maybe for a long period of time. The notion of complacency and things like that, sometimes new players bring new energy. And, you know, they saw Nakobe Dean and all those guys get their championship in 2021, and a bunch of guys got their championship in 2022. And all of a sudden now some of this new blood has a chance to put their fingerprints on a trophy the same way these guys have the last couple of years. So while on the one hand, the inexperience, I'm sure, probably concerns coaches because they're trying to train these guys up. On the other hand, that new blood brings that new energy sometimes too, doesn't it?
It can. As long as you maintain the right mentality. You know, that's what's so important here is, you know, you think about the lessons that, you know, Jordan Davis and they go all the way. I mean, these guys go all the way back to Roquan when they talk about guys that set the tone, or the tenor, the Chubbs, the Michelles. They go back to that 2017 and how the message was carried on. Richie LeCounte, a verbal leader for quite some time, and you know, Trayvon Walker, the way he stepped up in his final year. Different guys, Andrew Thomas, can Cedric Van Pran imprint on these young men? Can Jamon Dumas-Johnson and Smile Munden, as Kirby Smart called them in his office earlier, and said, look, here's you guys on tape a year ago, and here's what you look like now. Are you the same? And they said, you know what? No, you know, they weren't practicing with the same sense of urgency. And one thing I'm a little concerned about, you know, I felt like the last 2 years, Brandon, with Clemson and Oregon staring down the barrel at this Georgia team, like these guys knew, look, you better be on point day one. You got an opponent that's capable of beating you with the talent, right? We didn't know what to expect from Oregon. Now, Monken would later tell us, that was the easiest game to prepare for all year. Dan did the same thing we practice against every day. I didn't think of it like that back then, but in hindsight, I suppose he was right. But when you've got UT Martin and you've got Ball State, I don't know that raises, you know, is it just human nature? And so what Kirby's got to do is he's got to help manufacture this sense of urgency and make them comfortable being uncomfortable, right? And how do you do that? How do you manufacture that when you're a preseason number one, when you're a two-time champion? Look, nobody's three-peated since Minnesota in the 1930s, and I don't even know how many people cared about football back then. So there's a reason why it hasn't happened, and Georgia is battling history and human nature to try to do something that, as I said yesterday, if Kirby wins 3 in a row, Brandon, he's on the Mount Rushmore. He's that fourth guy with Spurrier, Saban, and the Bear on the SEC Mount Rushmore. If he wins 3 in a row, and this whole conversation about Alabama and Georgia, which to me has jumped the shark, I mean, Georgia's won the last 2. We're not having it anymore. We don't have to keep listening to Alabama fans talk about, well, Georgia hasn't beaten so many teams on the road. Well, they don't play them. That's not their fault. You know, I mean, they beat who they put in front of them. They haven't lost a regular season game in 3 years, for goodness sake. So I want to see Georgia get the three-peat. I love our two-peat T-shirt. I'm ready to see a three-peat T-shirt. I'm ready for that conversation.
No, that's really good stuff. Mike, a little bit of time we have left. What's on your mind about this quarterback competition that is going to be on display on Saturday? Fans get a chance to see all the stuff they've heard whisper and innuendo about over the course of these last couple of weeks. I think it's really fun. It's about as entertaining a G-Day as I can remember from that standpoint. What's on your mind about what we'll see from the signal callers on Saturday?
Well, you and Jake Fromm had a fantastic conversation about it yesterday. Let me say that. That was fascinating, and, you know, the direction that you led Jake and the fact that he followed you there. I mean, I'm here, Brandon's leading Jake to the trough, and I'm going, Jake's not going to drink that water, Brandon. But there he was, drinking the water. Yeah, Carson Beck, a lot of pressure on him. Oh, yeah, game-like situation. This is important. I'm going, wow. Like, this. Why didn't I get that Jake when he was a player? You know, it's like truth serum. He drinks it on DawgNation. Back when he was a player, everything was vanilla. But I'll tell you, Jake Fromm, not afraid to speak his mind on DawgNation Daily, and with some tremendous insight. And I'm following Jake's lead. I think he's right. I think we're going to find out about. I think Carson Beck has to be feeling some pressure. I think Carson Beck has to want to. But this is the delicate balance. On the one hand, Carson Beck wants to be the gunfighter and show you his arm and show you the playmaking. But on the other, he's got that other little angel on the other shoulder going, Coach Smart says, don't take chances if you don't have to. Throw it away on third down. Live for another day. And then you got Vandegrift, who I think is, you know, what did Jake call him? Stetson on steroids, and can run through all these tackles, but there's going to be a quick whistle. So we're not really going to get to see Vandegrift do Vandegrift things because of the nature of the game. And then there's Gunnar Stockton. He's saying, guys, don't forget about me. I'm starting to learn the offense. Give me a chance. Okay, we will, but it's probably going to be Vandegrift or Beck, right? So there's a lot of dynamics and interesting facets to what these quarterbacks do. What they don't do is probably just as important, and how this game plays out.
And I also think there's something to be said for kind of pretty football. I mean, Mike, I don't know how many spring games you've attended across the SEC, but I know it's a large number. These games aren't always pretty, and I don't – pretty's not a word we describe football with a lot. But you know what I'm talking about. Like Auburn last Saturday had a very ugly spring game, and that was weather-marred, so I won't completely trash them for it because it was raining. But, Mike, I think you and I both have sat through some sloppy spring games where it's just kind of Like, I think I'm going to give credit to both these quarterbacks on Saturday if this game looks crisp, right? Even if it's a somewhat easy throw or even if it's a running play. If the game looks crisp, if it looks well played, if the offenses have a little bit of a hum to them, I'm going to give the quarterback some credit for that, even if it's not a 40-yard pass down the field. There's something to be said for the word that Smart's used a few times this spring. There's something to be said for the administration of all this, you know, just kind of getting out there and making it move and making it hum and putting on a nice show for television, a nice show for the tens of thousands of fans who are going to be there. There's a part of me that wants to evaluate this beyond just the sort of basic, ooh, this guy really threw it really far or this guy threw a very tight spiral. There's a part of me that just wants to see crisply, clean played football, and that to me sort of speaks to quarterback too.
Well, it does, but I don't know how much we can read into it. I'm pulling up the 2021 G-Day box score, and JT was 28 of 41 for 324 yards and 3 touchdowns, and Carson was 22 of 31 for 236, and Stetson was 3 of 4 for 58. I mean, now down here I see Javon Bullard, this guy. Who's this Javon Bullard guy with 7 tackles? We hadn't heard much about him. Who's this Mal Munden guy with 5? I mean, there were some signs of the defensive players there. But from an offensive standpoint, and then last year, I think I got in trouble for this because I thought Carson Beck looked better than anybody last year. Stetson 15 to 35, 2 picks, 273. Carson 13 to 21, 246. So to your point, there can be clean football, but I don't know that that's a good sign. You know, because it's number ones on number ones. First of all, how are they going to divvy that up? That's the other question because they've been splitting the number ones. So that's kind of intriguing. Who has who for a support cast? Who has to go against the number one defense? I think it was it 2019 or 2020? It had to be 2019 or 2018, actually. It would have been 2019. When I think Jake threw a pick 6, I think Eric Stokes might have baited him into a pick 6 early in that scrimmage because he do. So I'm with you. I like seeing the pretty, and I think we will. But I don't think we can get too caught up in it. I think we're going to see Carson Beck's arm strength and arm talent. I think we're going to see Brock Vandegrift's mobility. I think we're going to see some receivers make some plays. I think we're going to see some defensive players make some plays. And we're going to see some guys get hit and run. Remember a couple years ago when Dirty Dan Jackson came up and Darnell just like ran over him? We were all like holding our breath to see if Dan Jackson was still in one piece at the end of that play. We're going to see some moments like that. But we don't get to see it in the totalitarian added emphasis of, oh my gosh, it looks like a foot. We're just going to see just enough to go, yep, this guy has got this and this guy's got that. So I think it's going to be exciting and entertaining, and I'm eager for it because, like you said, there's so many young midterm enrollees, whether it's 21 or 22, and the transfers, so many new faces and new names and new numbers to learn for this this three-peat championship quest.
Mike, it's great to talk to you. Looking forward to seeing you on Saturday. It's going to be a fun day. I think the weather, is supposed to be nice. So all systems pointing towards a very, very enjoyable spring Saturday between the hedges on Saturday. So we're looking forward to your coverage of it all, and we'll look forward to talking to you then.
Thanks, Brandon. We'll see you.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So I've sort of said this plenty of times in the past that I'm not that into defense on G-Day, which is a weird thing to say, I have to admit, because obviously the Georgia defense is amazing. But, Georgia's going to have some fire breathers that are not playing on Saturday. We know that. Schematically, they're kind of hampered anyway by, like what Georgia does to quarterbacks, they don't want Georgia doing that to its own quarterback. So they're already kind of hampered in terms of what they're going to be allowed to do. So how do you evaluate what you see defensively? Obviously the look of guys is going to be an important part of that. I think we've certainly been hearing a lot about a pretty spirited competition at secondary defensive back. Obviously a cornerback position up for grabs. I do think you can kind of judge how so-and-so is running step for step in pass coverage. I do think that translates to the fall. That's one of those things I do think you can see. Obviously they'll, if they're out there playing for 2 hours, there are going to be some big hits. You'll judge some of that there as well. Watching how a guy moves laterally side to side, I think you get some of that. But I've said this before that, and I don't make any secret about this, I view G-Day as an offensive exhibition. I don't really view this as a day to evaluate the Georgia defense. Georgia could score 100 points on Saturday. I don't believe it will, but it could score 100 points combined on Saturday, and I wouldn't think one thing about the defense. I really wouldn't, because I don't think this is a defensive day. It's not supposed to be, I don't believe. So there are still some things you can evaluate from that, though, and there'll be plenty of talk about that. And a lot of this is going to be about how guys look, how guys move, and certainly, in the pass coverage situation against what we think is a pretty good crop of Georgia wide receivers, who's running step for step in coverage right there in what sounds like it's been kind of a nasty competition over there at that one cornerback spot with a lot of guys putting their hand in the air saying, I want to be on the football field. So doesn't get much better than that. And we'll get a chance to see like a Tyke Smith, in kind of a bigger role maybe. So some of that's going to be fun on Saturday as well, even though admittedly I'm a little bit pro-offense on a day like this. All right, one thing I meant to ask Mike about and forgot to is the fact we're getting very, very close to the DawgNation Cruise, and Mike's going to be a part of it. So I didn't get a chance to ask him about that. I should have. But nonetheless, it allowed me to segue here into cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And, for those of you who cruise, you kind of know this. There's that moment when the cruise gets closer when you start getting those like messages and you're kind of registering. There's like a little bit of procedural stuff that has to be done. And every time you do something like that, it starts to feel really real. And maybe you're visiting that Royal Caribbean app and stuff like that, which, by the way, they have a great app, fun for using on board, things like that, for planning your shows, your entertainment, your dining, things like that. There's that kind of moment when you kind of get inside of a couple of weeks here, or inside of a month. That's really when it kind of starts to sort of crank up, where it feels really real. And I would say the DawgNation Cruise right now feels really real. So can't wait to be on board with you. Hundreds of folks going to be there with us on this one this time, and we're so excited about it. I'm telling y'all, I am just ready to go. So if you can't be on board this one with us, I would say the next best thing you can do is plan your own Royal Caribbean Cruise vacation. Our friend Jessica Slater is going to help you do it. 770-718-9147. That's her number, 770-718-9147. And by the way, not too soon to start thinking about January of 2024, the debut of Icon of the Seas. If you're watching on video, you see some footage of that, kind of artist-rendered footage, if you will. But this is going to be a completely different experience than Royal Caribbean's ever offered before, kind of redefining what a cruise vacation is all about. I'm really fascinated by this because, obviously I've been on a good number of Royal Caribbean cruise ships, and some of the ways in which this ship's going to be laid out, it's going to be very different before. I think it's going to be enhanced. There's some unbelievable concepts in terms of the largest water park at sea and some of the really cool things they're providing here. So I think it's a really cool thing, and I can't wait to see it. And boy, oh boy, I really hope that somehow, some way I get a chance to taste this early 2024 to kind of tell you what it's all about. I feel like my job as a endorser of sorts for Royal Caribbean, I feel like it would just be easier to do my job and tell you about Icon of the Seas if I actually had a chance to be on the ship. So hopefully that'll all work out. We'll see if that actually plays out that way. Nonetheless, let's go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean here right now. One of the things I want to tell you about yesterday, and I didn't have a chance to do it, but I want to do it right now, So Paul Finebaum made an appearance on WJOX morning show in Birmingham. Does it every Monday. I like to kind of listen to him sometimes because it's a pretty good, kind of survey of what is making news in the SEC right now. And on Monday, some of the subject of Auburn came up. Auburn had just had its spring game. We told you earlier this week it's a pretty ugly spring game. Some of that due to the weather, some of that due to the fact that Auburn's not very good. But Paul Finebaum was asked about the fact that right now expectations seem to be really low at Auburn. Now, try to find the quote. I want to read it to you. He says, I think that fans are now at Auburn immune to mediocrity. And they just can't demand more until they give someone time. He says, this obviously some of this related to Brian Harsin, the fact that Brian Harsin was below the standard of what the SEC requires, but even kind of the tail end of the Gus Malzahn era, where it seems like, one of the things that probably got Gus in trouble there at Auburn was he said something to the effect of, trying to win that fourth SEC game and kind of treating that as a good thing when that's essentially just 500 at the SEC level. That's way below what Auburn fans had kind of expected prior to that. But kind of since then, Auburn fans have, I think, kind of lowered their standard for the program. It's a very interesting evaluation of where things stand. Now, I've told you plenty of times before, I think Hugh Freeze is a good coach. I really do. Now, is he a good man? That's for you to decide. Obviously, there's plenty of evidence to the contrary. But nonetheless, I do think he's a good coach, and there's plenty of evidence to support that point of view there too. So if there is any coach capable of kind of making that transition where Auburn fans can kind of believe again, I have to say I think that Hugh Freeze is about as capable of providing that as anybody. Right now, the roster is not in place to be able to do that. What Freeze has said, and we gave you this quote on our show the other day, I forget what day it was, is they're going to hope to be very active in this transfer portal coming up, very active in this portal. So I think whatever becomes available over the course of that 2-week period post-G Day, and I'm not saying off the Georgia roster, I'm just saying just transfers in general, it just sort of happens to begin the day of G Day, April 15th. Whatever enters that portal from across the country over the course of that 2-week period, that I think is going to determine a team like Auburn how much of a chance they have to make any noise in Hugh Freeze year one. And this is really probably a 2-3 year story for a guy that has won games the SEC's, beaten Nick Saban twice. He beat Kirby Smart, and the only time he faced him, of course, that was a very different Georgia team in 2016. But the point is, Hugh Freeze won some games the SEC. I think he's going to have a chance to win games at Auburn. We'll see if he has a chance to sort of resurrect some of that belief there on the Plains, which Paul Finebaum says has kind of disappeared. Now, speaking of Auburn, y'all don't care about media stuff. I totally understand that. Totally get this. But how many times for those of you who read articles online, things like that, ESPN.com, how many articles has ESPN.com written profiling Lane Kiffin? Does it not seem like they do one of these like every month? It's like the big profile of whatever's on Lane Kiffin's mind at that particular time. Obviously, part of this is the fact that Lane Kiffin is very accessible to ESPN. My one big complaint with ESPN's college football coverage is they are more than willing to trade favorable coverage for access. They do this with Nick Saban. They do this with Lane Kiffin. It's just very obvious how ESPN plays the game on this kind of stuff. A lot of the national media does that. ESPN, I think, does it pretty egregiously when it comes to Saban and Kiffin in particular. This is like I don't know, it seems like they do one of these every month, some long story about the inner workings of Lane Kiffin's psyche and his heart and his mind and whatever else. And so in this particular case, it's Alex Scarborough, who I don't dislike as a writer. I think he's written some good stuff, doing one of these long profiles on Lane Kiffin, this time about what went into the decision to consider going to Auburn and what went into the decision to consider staying at Ole Miss. And you can read the whole thing for yourself. But ultimately, you're kind of left with a couple of key takeaways here. Two things. First of all, the timing of this article is intentional. Kiffin's willingness to sort of sit down for another one of these interviews is intentional because, as I said, that transfer portal window is about to open up again. And for Kiffin, this is another commercial of, hey, we are open for business here at Ole Miss. There are a bunch of SEC teams that want transfers and they want them bad. And what they're talking about right now is not guys who happen to be in the transfer portal. This is about that guy who's on the fence about entering the portal. Some of this is, hey, transfer and we'll take you. We talk about tampering all the time around here. We think that college football should pay more attention to that, but no one seems to care. This is one of those things of, hey, we got the open for business sign up right now. And so that's part of the reason why Kiffin would sit down for an interview like this at ESPN.com. The other thing is this, and we don't really care about this because Ole Miss is not really on our radar. Oxford, Mississippi is actually a pretty long way from here, from where I'm sitting. But the people in Oxford, the people around the Ole Miss football program, they do care about this. Lane Kiffin was not a popular figure in Oxford at the end of this past season. He was not. A lot of Ole Miss fans were really embarrassed about how all of that played out. And Kiffin in this particular story tries to explain himself a little bit, including the decision to kind of have all of this the decision about going to Auburn or not sort of hanging over the Egg Bowl game there against Mississippi State, a game they lost, by the way. So I'll just read you one quote here. Kiffin saying, so you can look at that and say, all right, there's something we wish we wouldn't have happened. The whole Auburn thing was a distraction, but you can also look at it and say, if that didn't happen, what would the collective be? And not just in what we signed in the last portal and recruiting class, but the future, or more importantly, keeping our own players. So to me, that seems like sort of a weird thing of Lane Kiffin almost saying, hey, you should thank me for what I did. I got news for you. There are a bunch of folks around Oxford, Mississippi that don't want to thank Lane Kiffin for anything. They want Lane Kiffin to start winning some football games and stop making excuses for why you can't recruit high school players and start doing something with the transfers you brought in, because the high-profile quarterback you brought in from USC a year ago, Jackson Dart, wasn't very good. And that's why you had to bring in 2 more transfer quarterbacks here this year. So this is one of those things that if all you did was read ESPN.com, you'd think Lane Kiffin was at the top of the sport. But instead, what he actually is losing to his in-state rival, flirting with taking a job, creating media wars with local reporters over, rumors that everyone knew had some substance to them. And Kiffin's own university community is pretty bothered by what he did. So part of this ESPN story on the part of Lane Kiffin is a way of trying to explain what was a little bit of an embarrassing chapter in his tenure there at Ole Miss, and that's probably worth noticing. And then finally, there's this. I noticed that Greg McElroy, the former Alabama quarterback, has been pretty outspoken this offseason. He made an appearance on one of those streaming video shows that people do, and talking about Jalen Milroe, the Alabama quarterback. And he was really kind of talking up Milroe. He's gotten better and this and that, and he's taking, just really growing as a quarterback. And if you listen to McElroy, who you would assume, because he played for Nick Saban, has some access to Nick Saban, you would assume that McElroy is saying this because maybe Milroe is a real factor to actually win this starting quarterback job. And if that happens, this is not what Alabama fans thought was going to happen, nor what they wanted to have happen. This is not what they thought. They thought that after seeing Milroe play last year and kind of only being okay, had a little bit of an issue with turnovers, fumbles in particular, after kind of seeing that kind of be on display, there was a lot of attention being paid then to Ty Simpson. And every football fan does this. The thing you haven't seen becomes more interesting than the thing you have seen. And everybody assumed because they had seen Milroe and he was only okay, that meant Ty Simpson must be better because they thought they were, it was their birthright to have a great quarterback. Well, guess what? I haven't heard a peep out of Ty Simpson this entire spring. And I'm not so sure an Alabama fan has either. And we told you, we try to be fair and balanced of the day. Malik Benson, junior college wide receiver, sounds like he's had a pretty good spring for the Crimson Tide. There are some guys who've earned some buzz there at Tuscaloosa thus far this spring. It does not seem like Ty Simpson's been one of those guys. And so that means unless there's some sort of magical transfer quarterback falling out of the heavens in a week or so, that means that Jalen Milroe may end up being the guy for Alabama. Based on some of the chatter from Greg McElroy, that would seem to be a very real possibility. If that be the case, a lot of Alabama fans themselves are going to be pretty disappointed in that. Now, who knows? Maybe Jalen Milroe really has gotten a lot better. It's at least a possibility. But this is not what Alabama fans were hoping to hear this spring. But thus far, there is no noise whatsoever that I can tell coming from Simpson at all. I'm not quite so sure he's the guy there. And that is an interesting development. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, I love Wednesdays on our show because it gives me a chance to give a shout out to something I just love. And I especially love it this time of year. I'm talking about the Finish Long Drink. Now, some of you know we've been talking about the Finish Long Drink for quite some time around our program. And I'm thankful we're going to be doing that for quite some time to come here, there as well. I think it's a really cool story for 2 reasons. I think for a lot of us, the Finish Long Drink was an introduction to a brand new category of beverage. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail. In other words, it comes in a can, so a lot of folks would just sort of think it's a beer, but it's not. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail. What that means is if you like mixed drinks, this is a mixed drink in a can, which is kind of a cool thing. And so you can drink it out of the can, you can pour it in a glass, you can do whatever you're going to do. Plus, in particular, the Finish Long Drink has an amazing backstory there as well. Starting in Finland back in the 1950s, that's why it's called the Finnish Long Drink. When the Summer Games were there, this drink was invented as a way of celebrating that. Now, it's been in America for a couple of years, and now it's available in Georgia there as well. So if you have not tried the Finish Long Drink yet, it is time to do that. Go to thelongdrink.com. You can learn about the 4 different Finish Long Drink varieties. It's the Long Drink Cranberry, which a lot of folks really love. The folks in my neighborhood especially, that's a big thing in our pool each and every summer. The Long Drink Strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. I know some of y'all like that. Long Drink Zero, no carbs, no sugar. You're trying to look good in the gym or your swimsuit. That'll help you out with that. Long Drink Traditional. This is probably my favorite kind. The Traditional comes in a blue can. It's got the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick to go along with that. Really just a great thing. And if you're enjoying the Finish Long Drink, do me a favor. Hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily, and we'll feature you Friday as part of our big finish presented by the Finish Long Drink. Y'all, this is the time of year for the Finish Long Drink. You better believe that. A lot of folks are going to be enjoying that as part of their tailgates at G-Day on Saturday. We want to see you in style with the Finish Long Drink. Glad to have all of you as a part of the program today. By the way, according to our great producer, Kaylee Manziel, Athens, Georgia was the second city in the U.S. to have access to the Finish Long Drink. Very interesting. So we've seen it around Athens, a lot of the bars and stuff like that. Folks love the Finish Long Drink, and Athens kind of leading the way there when it comes to Finish Long Drink. I did not realize that, but good information from our good friend Kaylee Manziel, and that's why we have her around here for what we like to do. So enjoy yourself some Finish Long Drink, and then we'll see you on Friday for the big finish presented by the Finish Long Drink there as well. All right, very important golden shoe. I dare say this may be the most important golden shoe we have ever done. We learned news yesterday that I was not expecting. Now, maybe I should have been, but I was not expecting this. We found out that on Saturday, G-Day, already a can't-miss event, made even more significant because there'll be the passing of the collar, if you will, from UGA 10 to UGA 11. So I have my UGA 10 shirt on today in honor of Q. But on Saturday, Q gives way to Boom. So the dog's name is Boom, which is a great name, of course. And Boom on Saturday will get a new name. He will now become UGA 11. So Georgia Athletics putting it on Twitter yesterday. Join us at approximately 3:50 this Saturday for the collaring ceremony for a brand new UGA. Welcome Boom as UGA 11. And truly, we welcome him in style with a golden shoe here today. Congratulations, Boom. May your reign be long and prosperous. Gatorade Countdown, we know this. Boom's going to be ready to watch the Dogs beat up on the lousy, stinking Gators again this upcoming October. How about 199 days from now? That's getting closer. It's our Gator Hater Countdown here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We will see you again tomorrow. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. I feel like we have done due diligence on our cool down the last couple of days. We went to darn near 15 till yesterday, so we cannot go really long today because we have some stuff going on here today. So we cannot go crazy long, and I apologize for that. But I feel like we've done right by you as far as cool downs go. I am going to start on YouTube today though because I don't feel like I've done that in a couple of days, and so we'll kind of take a couple of swings through the comment section. We'll see what y'all are arguing about, and then we'll get to you after that. Let's go says, remember what I yelled after the after Georgia? Oh, after the Georgia Rose Bowl game. What was yelled by Kirby Smart? Yeah, that may have been part of that motivation for that name. You may be very well right about that. Paul Moon says, I've literally never started on YouTube before. Lies, I tell you. Lies. Let's see what else. Oh, no. Jay Shipe says that his client's dog died yesterday. R.I.P. to Dexter, one of the 2 dogs ever that didn't like me near their mama. He says the other one was my own mama's dog, so there you go. No doubt. Yeah, let's go. That was very funny from Kirby Smart post Rose Bowl. Still, even after 2 straight national championships, one of the best moments in Georgia football history is still that Rose Bowl and the boom, after the win. No question about that. Cassie Turner says she got a new job, won't be able to come on quite as much. Cassie, I'm disappointed. You got to have priorities in life. Listen, you got your whole life to work. You got your whole life to go make a living and further yourself and achieve all your goals and ambitions. But this particular time of your life, this is about being here for your DawgNation family. So we're sad to see you leave our live comment section. Hopefully you'll still be able to catch the show on demand. But we're going to miss you around here. And It's just a shame to know that you're putting your need for money and your career ahead of being a part of this with us every day. Very, 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 very disappointed to hear that. Jonathan Aaron says, I was watching a recap over the past season. I really forgot about how the Missouri game was. He says, do you think we'll have a game like that this year? So 2 things about this. The Missouri game was one of those deals where, like being in Columbia, we did a nice weekend. The weather was beautiful. I would say, Georgia's about to have a different SEC schedule. They're not going to be going to Columbia quite as much. But I would say in the future, for those of you who kind of like take that one road game a year, I think Columbia ought to be on your list. It's a long way. You probably have to fly. But you can either fly to like St. Louis or Kansas City. So we'd gone to like a Cardinals game the night before, had some like Columbia, Missouri's got a lot of good restaurants. That it's not a bad place to visit at all. So my point of this is we'd had a really nice weekend, gone to Busch Stadium near the end of the season. We saw Albert Pujols hit a home run. It was really fun. Pujols had, kind of exceeded 700 home runs for his career. And, you go the next day, you have some great food in Columbia. It's like a sort of a laid-back, easy road trip, beautiful fall weather. The Missouri fans could not have been nicer. They were scared to death, of Georgia. Could not have been nicer to all of us. Just, really hospitable. And then you get in there, and I don't know what happened, but like, what is Georgia had an early turnover? Is that what it was? And all of a sudden, the crowd they just changed. They went from being like super nice and hospitable, and now they're into the game. They kept playing that dadgum Narcos, trumpet song. And all of a sudden this stadium turned into a house of horrors, just like that. It almost seemed like the crowd kept getting bigger too. Like more and more people were like coming into the stadium, it sort of felt like, because it kept getting louder and louder and louder. And there's this weird transition sometimes you make as a Georgia fan where at the beginning, you're like, well, I guess it's going to be one of those days where Georgia just doesn't look its best. And you're kind of disappointed because you like watching Georgia just maul people. And then as the game goes on, it kind of turns into something else. All of a sudden, now you're like, oh, my gosh, is Georgia going to lose? And for a minute there against Missouri, I was really getting nervous that Georgia might lose that game. And thankfully, that didn't happen. But I remember that the kind of evolution of thought of like, oh boy, this isn't some, fun little weekend away. All of a sudden now Georgia's fighting for its life against a team that you never would have guessed that would have happened against. And so to answer your question of will that happen again this year, I hate to say this, but probably so. Y'all, college football is not easy to predict. Everything on paper sort of stands that not only will Georgia win the national championship, there's an argument to be made that Georgia will win the championship without even playing a close football game. On paper, that's what seems like should be true. That was almost true a year ago, almost. But somehow, some way, and honestly, it'll definitely be something you don't expect because almost every game is a game you expect Georgia to dominate. Maybe with the exception of Tennessee on the road, maybe just winning that might be enough. Every other game is expected to be Georgia domination. So one of those games likely won't be that. So yeah, I would say buckle your seatbelt to probably have to. We don't know when it's coming. Missouri may have been the game last year you'd at least expected that to be. But it's probably coming at some point in time, and what you hope is that Georgia has enough stuff to kind of, get through all of that. With the exception of the Ohio State game, Georgia played 3 postseason games. LSU for the SEC championship, TCU for the national championship. Even if you want to count the games that Georgia played against ranked opponents last year, Oregon, Tennessee, all of the games, with the exception of Ohio State, that was a true knockdown dragout, all of the games that you would have expected Georgia to be challenged in, those games were cakewalks. Those games were easy. What did Georgia win those games by? An average of 30-something points, maybe even more. And yet the toughest game Georgia played, the game that was essentially for the national championship, took place in Columbia, Missouri. College football is a very funny sport. Very funny sport. Let's see what else. Reggie Fly says, why we keep our coordinators up? First it was Monken, then Schumann, then Hartley. Seems like we initiate this stuff and then complain after they leave. Better to keep our mouths shut. You mean we talk them up too much? Yeah, that may be true. And I will say that when I was watching the national championship, that's one of the things that I thought about, because I think I even said this on some of our shows around this time, that prior to this year's national championship, I sort of felt like that Todd Monken was actually getting less attention than his success was probably deserving of. I mean, listen, there were a lot of people after the 2021 season that tried to make it seem like this was only defense and there wasn't any offense to speak of. That was obviously incorrect, but that was kind of the narrative that was out there, that Monken had one of the best offenses in the country in 2021. And quietly, they had been pretty good offensively in 2020, given the fact they were only playing SEC opponents plus a top 10 Cincinnati team in the ball game. They'd actually had a pretty good year offensively in 2020 for the most part. That Monken was a great offensive coordinator for Georgia, and he kind of wasn't really getting the attention. But what kind of occurred to me was, okay, well, after you win a national championship game 65-7, all of a sudden now the secret's kind of out, and sure enough, 2 minutes later, Todd Monken's taking an NFL job again. That's kind of true. As far as the position coaches go, though, I mean, one of the things I think that demonstrates the strength of the Georgia program, probably more than anything else, is that willingness to spend big on Trey Scott or Todd Hartley, or at one point in time, Glenn Schumann was just a position coach. That willingness to spend big on these guys, and, you don't have to go be offensive coordinator at so-and-so State University. You can stay at Georgia. You can make, close to $1 million, and you kind of let your career come to you a little bit, and that's the strength of Georgia, is that guys don't have to be looking around. It's like, I kind of grew up working in radio and things like that, and there was always this assumption that, okay, well, whatever place you start at, you may be an intern there, and you may be trying to get kind of cut your teeth or kind of get your foot in the door. But eventually you're going to have to go somewhere else to really get paid. You're going to have to go somewhere else. It's like you have to go to a place, kind of earn your stripes a little bit, get yourself a little bit of a resume, and then to cash in, you've got to take that experience and then go work somewhere else. That's just kind of the way that media business sort of seems to work. And sometimes it seems like football is kind of the same way. Okay, well, I may be an analyst and I may be doing this, but I'm going to need to go somewhere else to kind of cash in and get my payment. Georgia position coaches don't have to do that. Georgia position coaches don't have to leverage interest somewhere else to get the money they deserve. Georgia takes really good care of its position coaches, and they're rewarded by, those guys returning with great performances each and every year. And so that's one of the real strengths of the Georgia program, is that you don't have a lot of position coaches looking around. You think Trey Scott could be a defensive coordinator right now? He absolutely could have. He probably could have even been one in the SEC. He just chose not to. Todd Hartley, could be an offensive coordinator somewhere right now? Probably could. But thus far, he's sort of choosing not to. Will you keep those guys forever? No, you won't. But if you can keep them for a little bit longer, that just makes the job of Kirby Smart that much easier, and that's what Georgia's doing a good job of. Georgia on Tap pointing out something pretty good here. That between Georgia's latest commit, Nitro, and the new mascot, Boom and Nitro would be quite a tag team combination. Yes, they would. Intercontinental Tag Champs, yeah, that sounds about right there, for sure. How about this? Carter Evans passed his steel design exam last week. Thanks for the motivation. Carter, I'm happy to hear that. I told y'all last week about Carter. All these people that know how to do stuff, I just am very thankful we have such skilled audience, right? Because that to me is one of those things that makes, I feel like my work matters when people who do work that matters, when they listen to the show, if I'm keeping them entertained, if I'm keeping them, from going crazy when they're doing a bunch of stuff, I feel like that is a job well done by me, because ultimately shouting into a microphone about college football might not matter all that much. But if people who are doing serious work choose to listen to the show, then you have to say, well, your time was well spent. I'm talking about myself at that point. So, listen, we don't have a society if we don't have stuff made by steel. Go look at every, city skyline you've ever seen. That's nothing but steel that's holding all that stuff up. So that's what we need in life right there. So that is really, really good stuff. Let's Go Brandon says, I am doing serious work. Well, that's good to know, Let's Go. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And Carter, I am very happy for you. That's always good news. Always good news. To be serious for 1 second. Everybody wants more money than they have, right? We all know that. There is no better way to get more money than to maximize your income. In other words, there's no hey, some sort of magical investment I want to get and I won't have to work anymore. That, for the most part, that's all kind of made up. There is no better driver of your own personal wealth than maximizing your income, the money you get paid for the work that you do. Finding a way to maximize that, in whatever field you're in, by the way, that is the ultimate creator of wealth. That's why there's so many people out there trying to get your income, because it's personal income that drives, for the most part, all wealth. And that's, that's as serious as I'm willing to be for as long as I'm willing to be. But any kind of thing you can learn how to do, extra skill you can add, anything you can do to add to your income earning potential for the work you do, it's the best decision you can ever make. Best decision you can ever make. Gerald Harmon says, congratulations to Carter. I'm a welder myself. That's good to know. That's awesome. I'm telling you, that is great work. That is great work. That is a good salary and a good life, for sure. For sure. Let's see what else. What's going on up here on Facebook? Philip Jordan Wells said, boom, boom, Brandon Adams, the dynamite drop in. Yeah, there you go. I like that. Barry Watkins says, here comes the boom, ignite the nitro. Yeah, so when we talked about Mr. Tuggle yesterday, I think it's Nigerian. I think that's how you say his first name, I believe. And like I said, I didn't know much about him. I won't pretend that I know every single recruit that exists. That's not a recruit that I knew much about. But when I realized his nickname was Nitro, at the very least, Nitro Tuggle is a two-time All-SEC performer. I mean, at the very least, that's two-time All-SECs right there. Let's see what else. Edwina Atwood, did I pronounce that correctly? I hope I did. Says it's her daughter's birthday. Is it Scotty Barnes' birthday today, too? Happy birthday, Scotty. That's awesome. Scotty, happy birthday to you, for sure. We've had a lot of birthdays in here lately, it seems like. Let's see what else is going on in here. Philip Jordan Wells says that Todd Monken was too busy chewing out Stiquavius to care about the press. There may have been some truth to that. That's one of those interesting relationships, I think. Barry Watkins says winning is going to always produce change. It is. And look, one of the things I think that's really kind of secretly very good about Kirby Smart is that, okay, so let's say that, I was Georgia head coach. Well, I could hire a staff if I get to go out and pluck the biggest names from the other coaching staffs, right? I mean, I could come up with a pretty good staff of coaches to hire just based on what I know about watching football. But there aren't enough of those famous position coaches available. In other words, it's like if Georgia magically had a coaching opening that came available, well, I could make a list of here's who Georgia ought to consider just based on watching football. But you can't always hire those guys for various reasons, or maybe the coaches themselves know a reason that guy shouldn't be hired. You know what I'm saying? There's, sometimes the personal relationships, personal experiences shape some of this kind of stuff. And so there's always going to be a shortage of position coaches who are even willing to do this work. I mean, there are a lot of guys who just want it easier than what the SEC requires, especially at a place like Georgia. So if you're going to have a good staff in place, you have to be able to pair some up-and-comers with some famous names. Like Georgia's got some famous coaches, Muschamp and Bobo, guys like that have been around for a while. People know who they are. But you've got to be able to pair, Chidera Uzodiribe. He has the look, doesn't he? I mean, he sort of looks like he's on his way. And that was a guy I'd never heard of at all until Kirby Smart had hired him. And yet when you see him, he clearly fits right in. He's clearly, upwardly mobile. He's driven to succeed. Fran Brown kind of the same way, when Fran was first hired, you're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. You're kind of bringing a guy down from New Jersey. New Jersey's kind of an underrated state for high school football, better high school football than a lot of people realize being played up there in New Jersey, specifically that state. But you kind of realize, oh, Fran Brown, he may be a northeastern guy, but he sort of fits in pretty well down here in the SEC, actually. That's a not famous coach that Kirby identified. Dan Lanning was like that. I'd never heard of Dan Lanning before Georgia hired him, and he's the head coach of Oregon now. Glenn Schumann wasn't even a coach. Glenn Schumann was just an analyst, and he was very young when Kirby tabbed him, and all of a sudden Glenn Schumann's turning down jobs, and he's making $2 million now. So part of what Kirby has done very well is it seems like he's got a pretty good eye for up-and-coming talent as a coach, and if you don't do that, if you can't identify diamonds in the rough of assistant coach on the rise, you won't have enough good coaches because there aren't enough famous ones to go around. There's the blue chip, offensive line coach, the blue chip, whatever, position coach, but there aren't enough of them. There's not enough of those. You have to be able to populate some of your coaching roster with up-and-coming names. Let's see what else is going on. Lucy Bowers-Boykin says, I'm still not sure about Stacey Searles. I can't help it. Look, I think there was a lot of skepticism when Stacey was rehired, at Georgia before last season. But all I can say is I really liked the Georgia offensive line last year. I really, really did. And I sort of expect that to be really good right now too. And one of the biggest things that happened for Georgia, in the last 12 months was Amarius Mims did not transfer. Amarius Mims, took a high-profile visit to Florida State, looked like he might be gone, then he wasn't. And now he's in line to be the bedrock of this line for this upcoming year. So I get where it comes from, but, I'm also – this is why I like sports. See, I follow politics, but I'm not really quite so sure I ever want to talk about politics for a living, because the frustrating thing to me about politics is I don't care which side of the politics thing you're on. It seems like people can't even agree what the scoreboard is. You know what I'm saying? It's like you argue about this, but there's no scoreboard to determine the winner and loser, it seems like sometimes. In sports, we do have a scoreboard. And what I love about sports is no matter what your background is or what your preferred outcome was, we all kind of agree that scoreboard determines who wins and who loses. In the case of Stacey Searles, I think it was justifiable to say, really, this guy coming back to Georgia, are we sure about that? But Stacey Searles has scoreboard on his side. And I just think in sports, we got to respect the scoreboard. And Stacey Searles can point at the scoreboard and say, look what I did. They should have won the Joe Moore Award, but I don't think that Georgia's ever going to win it. And part of me sort of hopes they never do, just to kind of keep the joke going. It's like no matter how good Georgia's offensive line is, like Michigan's going to win the next 9 Joe Moore Awards. But I don't know that any offensive line was more effective than Georgia was a year ago. And so I think you got to give credit for that. Let's see what else. Let me go to DawgNation.com for a minute. And then after that, we got to wrap. Matt Goodwin asked a good question. I don't know the answer to this. How many early enrollees Georgia? I mean, it'd be hard to have more than Georgia does. Is Georgia having so many? How much of a trend is that around the rest of the country? I actually don't know the answer to that. That's a really good question. I should probably do some research. What I would like is for one of y'all to do the research. Then I'll just give you credit for it. What's the common number of early enrollees now? Because, I mean, almost the entirety of Georgia's class is an early enrollee right now, which is about right there on that for sure. Let's see what else. Couple more before we go. JP mentions that Auburn road game. I would be a little bit careful about Auburn on the road. I would be a little bit careful about that. And maybe that's just kind of old school thinking, whatever. But what is the early Auburn schedule? Do they have a tough early schedule? Did we look at this the other day? Am I doing the same thing we've already done? What is Auburn's early schedule? So they're at Cal. They play UMass. They're at Cal, which is a very weird trip. They play Samford. They're at – okay, so this is interesting. So let's give them 3 non-conference wins. UMass, at Cal, Samford. And if Auburn goes on the road and loses to Cal, then Hugh Freeze should just stay out there. But let's assume they don't have that happen. Marshawn Lynch not walking through that door. UMass, at Cal, Samford. On Saturday, September 23rd, Auburn plays at Texas A&M. That is a really fun game. Auburn playing to get to 4-0 on the road at Texas A&M. I'd say that's a toss-up game. So what if Auburn wins on the road at Texas A&M and is 4-0 hosting Georgia on September 30th? I would guess that Jordan-Hare Stadium feels like a pretty big environment if it's 4-0 Auburn hosting Georgia that particular Saturday. I feel like that's a pretty big environment. Even though 3 of the wins would be, nothing. If you go on the road and win at Texas A&M, and come home and host Georgia on September 30th, that might be a pretty big environment right there. That could be something. Now, listen, I think Auburn's, doesn't have much chance of, if they're bowl eligible, they've probably had a halfway decent season. But could that be a tough road environment? I think there's a chance that could be. DMart42 says, y'all ever see what a $300,000 house looks like in Southern California? It's crazy. I mean, that was like the thing, when Reggie Bush got in trouble, right? This is obviously a good, long time ago. And it's like, and they gave him a $500,000 house. And you're like, if you live in Georgia, oh my gosh. But out there in, California, it's a very, very different type of thing in terms of what that was able to buy for you. So yeah, real estate prices in California, very, very different than they are here for sure. Kaylee Mansell joins us.
So it was just announced that South Carolina and Notre Dame women's basketball will open up this upcoming season in Paris, France. Do you see college football eventually making a transition to something like that?
So I'll tell you what I want Georgia to do. I don't want to go to Paris. It's a long flight. The season, I don't mean to be a wet blanket, but the season's long enough as it is already. It's like to put European travel into all this, I think would just be a real mess. I know some people who've done the NFL thing when they go to London. And that's hard. Like, you just don't get over that. That's hard. It's a long way away. But, Kaylee, what I want Georgia to do, and I hope Kirby hears this. I hope Josh Brooks hears this. Georgia needs to do this. Next year, 2024, LSU is opening the season in Las Vegas against USC. That's what Georgia needs to do. They need to play much the same way they played the Chick-fil-A kickoff in Atlanta or they played the mayonnaise game in Charlotte. They need to play a season opener in Las Vegas. There'd be 2 million Georgia fans going to Vegas for that. First game of the year, you got Cupcake City the following week back in Athens. Georgia, in that Darth Vader space-looking stadium out in Las Vegas to open the season. It'd be 200 degrees, I realize that, but just spend your time in the pool during the daytime. Georgia needs to open the season in Las Vegas. Las Vegas wants to be in this business now because, Dallas, Charlotte, Atlanta, they kind of all do that thing, and Las Vegas wants to do this now too. So, Kaylee, I don't want to go to Paris. I want to go to. I'll go stay at the Paris Hotel in Las Vegas. I want to do that. I want to see Georgia open the season in Las Vegas.
I mean, they do have a mini Eiffel Tower out there.
That's
so
exactly
it's
right.
like the same thing, right?
You stay at the Paris Hotel. That's exactly right. Got a little mini Arc de Triomphe out there too. So that's what I want to see Georgia do. You can have Paris. I'll take the Paris Hotel there in Las Vegas. That's what I want to see Georgia do. All right, we got to go. A couple of comments really quick. We'll get out of here. What else? Crow King 123 reminding us that Georgia is slated to go home and home with UCLA. I guess those will still get played. Honestly, I don't have a reason to think they won't, but there's obviously a lot of schedule change coming, and that's supposed to be soon, right? Isn't that supposed to be really soon? And one of the playoff games, the Rose Bowl game this year too. Not to look too far ahead, but we're back to like the best playoff games. No disrespect to our friends at the Peach Bowl in Atlanta, because obviously it's fun to be home this past year. But this upcoming year, you get the best crop of playoff games. There is not a dud in this bunch. You're either going back to Pasadena, and that is an unbelievable experience, and that is just the stuff of dreams. And the other playoff game this year is the Sugar Bowl. And listen, I think the Sugar Bowl is awesome. I really do. Even though it's kind of a sort of a consolation dud when you don't make the playoff. Still, New Orleans, New Year's weekend like that is so much fun. For a playoff game, it's even better. So this is a great crop of playoff games this year. Rose Bowl and Sugar Bowl, the two playoff games. National championship in Houston, by the way. There is a chance that if Georgia's go for 3-23, we may not come back home. We may just go, because New Orleans and Houston are just right down the road from each other. There is a chance we just go straight from New Orleans to Houston. There is a chance we might do that. Final comments. Miriam Corbin says Pasadena is wonderful. It really is. Pasadena is amazing. Edwina Atwood says, I like Vegas. My husband and I have been 5 times. I'm still not rich. Yeah, it's kind of funny how that works. By the way, I read a great article the other day. It was in Bloomberg about, the casino game that has the biggest house edge is roulette. Largest house edge is in roulette. But apparently there were these guys, and one of them was a gal, but this group basically that learned how to beat roulette. And I guess come to find out, there's like a computer thing you can do to sort of do it. But apparently the crux of the story is that the one guy had trained himself so well, and it's a long story. I can't give you all the details. But he had trained himself so well that he essentially learned how to beat certain roulette wheels without the aid of a computer. Like he had just developed this internal clock in his head, and he beat roulette, and he was taking down houses like for like $1 million. And he wasn't cheating. It was not cheating. He was beating roulette, which is, it's got nothing to do with Georgia football, of course, but fascinating story. Matt Rugavina reminding us, Matt, one of our, of course, legendary commenters, saying, if Georgia goes to Houston, you're doing a show from the bar in my house. We may actually have to do that. We may have to do a show from the Rugavina mansion there for that. That would be really, 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 really fun. Beryl Gilbert Dixon says, I rode the bus to the Rose Bowl. It was worth every minute. So I will tell you, I am of an age in which, like, my childhood was the 1980s. And to me, everybody I'm sure feels this way, but I feel like the 80s was the best time to be a child, like a boy, like a child. It was awesome. And one of the TV shows were just so good for kids back then. And like one of the shows that I loved, and some of you who are kind of close to my age, you'll remember this, was Chips. Remember the show where like you had Ponch and John, California Highway Patrol, they rode the motorcycles. So, media gets treated pretty well in these playoff games. To be honest with you, the coastal elites get treated pretty well. And at the Rose Bowl, they kind of take it to a next level. So downtown LA, where all the events happen, is a decent ways from Pasadena. And so for the Rose Bowl, you get in the bus and you go to Pasadena with a police escort. So you've never moved this fast on LA roads before, but your police escort is actually California Highway Patrol motorcycles. So as a kid from the 80s, like I'm just eating this alive. The idea that our bus is just flying down the road and I got Chips motorcycles all around me here, the same, outfits that, Ponch and John wore. I was very, very happy, which probably makes me a dork, but I was very, very happy. Jerry Popham says there was a guy who did so well in Vegas that he drove there in an $80,000 Cadillac and came home riding a $400,000 Greyhound bus. That's pretty funny, Jerry. I like that. That's pretty funny. I like that. All right, we've got to get ready to go. All right, let me go back to DawgNation for 1 second. Let's see what everybody else says. David A. Thomas. He says, does the ghost of Kyle Shanahan show up in Houston? Oh, boy, I hope that's not the case, because that was a house of horrors for the Atlanta Falcons. I hope that's not the case, but that's pretty funny to think about. BA's Bald Spot says, have I seen the picture of Hugh Freeze's office phone? I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that. You'll have to tell me more about that. Hey, David A. Thomas also pointing out that Kirby this year, different team. Ironically, Kirby's playing both sides of this revenge. The same team from 2016 Ole Miss, same coach, Hugh Freeze, just with a different program. One of the worst games of the Kirby Smart era was that Ole Miss game in 2016. It was 200 degrees in Oxford. Georgia got absolutely obliterated by an Ole Miss team that was average as grits. Of course, a lot has changed since then, of course. But maybe there will be a little bit of payback dished out to Hugh Freeze for that. Maybe that's the case. Hugh Freeze sort of strikes me as one of those coaches that Kirby might not like, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Foster Moss says, I'm on a speed. Yeah, BA's Bald Spot does a lot of stuff at DawgNation.com for our 1st and 15. And listen, my hair is okay in the front here, but up at the top, you got a little bit going on. So I have to own that. Paul, yeah. So BA's Bald Spot's new to some of y'all because maybe you only hear, maybe he mostly appears in our 1st and 15, but I've heard that before. Listen, that is what it is. Thankfully, I still have enough hair in the front, but up on top, for sure. All right, we got to go. All right, good stuff. Thanks for being here. Y'all check out Atlanta Journal-Constitution, AJC.com. I said this to our 1st and 15 audience earlier. I don't follow the NBA nearly as closely as I used to, but if you're a football fan, I think what you saw in the Atlanta Hawks last night was exactly the kind of basketball you could fall in love with. They went into Miami last night and completely out-physicaled the Heat. In fact, I think that Jimmy Butler even admitted that. Atlanta got all over, especially the offensive glass. They got all over the offensive glass last night. Tons of putback points and just played tough. They played tough. For a team that's been literally exactly average, 500 all season long, they save their best for when it really mattered. They're like the kings of the play-in because I think they dominated last year in the play-in too. That was fun last night. Now they so Saturday's a good day for sports because you got G-Day and then you got Hawks-Celtics game 1, I believe, that night. So they've earned the right to be in the actual real playoffs now, and it's not too bad. So you can read more about that online, ajc.com. Also go to ajc.com and try to find out if the Braves are going to get healthy. They did win again last night against Cincinnati, so the Reds come to town at a good time. You got Kyle Wright back on the mound last night. That's an important return. But it seems like you're still a ways away from getting Max Fried back, Michael Soroka, who knows. Obviously, you got Darno dealing with the concussion, and Harris is out for right now. So Braves a pretty banged-up baseball team. You can read more about that online, ajc.com as well. And our friends at R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised, and air conditioning unit with this nice warm spring weather here. You can go ahead and get that tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Find them online, rsandrews.com for more on that. They'll get you tuned up. They'll get you cool and comfortable all spring and summer long, and it only costs you $99. So find out more online today, rsandrews.com. Have a good day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We will talk to you then.